My name is Ilze Duarte. I translate from Portuguese. I will be reading from a novel titled The Secret Bird by Brazilian author Marilia Arnaud. I'm still seeking a publisher for this novel in my translation. I need to give you an introduction to the story. This is the story of Aglaia Negromonte, who is now 40 years old, but looking back at the events of her youth that changed her life dramatically. When she is 13 years old, Aglaia finds out that she has a half-sister, and this child is named Tali. She's actually a young woman. She's about 15 years old. She is a child born of an extramarital affair Aglaia's father, Heleno Negromonte, had with a French actress. Tali comes from France to live with the Negromontes, and Aglaia's life is turned upside down. Aglaia feels terribly betrayed by her father and is also very, very upset because she now sees that he is lavishing on this new daughter the love and attention that Aglaia so wanted from her father and has very rarely received. She directs all her anger toward Tali, and her behavior becomes more and more aggressive to the point that Aglaia is coming close to her own destruction. She is telling us the story, so we do know that she survives, but it's a very painful journey. The passage that I'm going to read from describes the relationship between Aglaia and her father. And it's important to note that literature and the theater are the only connections that Aglaia has and has ever had with her father. So now the reading. At our home, everything revolved around the word, not the ordinary word which organized everyday life, but the word that opened doors to the imaginary, to fantasy, to the miracle of reinvented life. In each room, there was a dictionary, at that time physical and immense. Besides answering questions that arose during games of Scrabble, it fulfilled the function of game board. My father would have us sit in a circle on the living room rug, set a dictionary in the center, and open it to a random page. Each of us, eyes closed, would slide our index finger down the page and stop on any word. After reading the definition, we would make up a sentence using that word. When it was my father's turn to play, he would not only make up a sentence, but also recite some poem or go to the office and come back with a book from which the word sprung with a particular meaning. He used to be good at this. He used to impress us with enormous gestures, a low and measured voice, speeches about crucial moments in the lives of the great figures in theater history, Sophocles, Aeschylus, Euripides, and about the morality plays, the epic, modern, and contemporary theater, the theater of the absurd. I don't know precisely when I stopped paying attention to my father's monologues, when his stories started to go in one ear and out the other, when I became indifferent to his faces and poses. I know we had already moved from the house to the apartment, and Tali still didn't exist in our lives. It was about the time he decided to put a sofa bed in the office and sleep there. Every morning before leaving for school, I would peek at my father through the keyhole. Bertolt Brecht, Tennessee Williams, Plinio Marcos, Nelson Rodrigues, and other greats of the dramatic arts lined the walls and floor of the makeshift office set up in the laundry room. Newspapers and piles of paper sprouted everywhere. Cigarette butts overflowed from ashtrays scattered over his desk, and plates with leftover food formed a constellation on the dusty floor. Still wearing the clothes from the day before, his mouth open, his wide chest going up and down, my father, the great actor and playwright Heleno Negromonte, whom everyone revered, seemed to be the most helpless man on the face of the earth. Cloistered in that room, he spent his days reading, writing, talking on the telephone, practicing lines again and again. My mother lamented the fact that her husband couldn't fix anything that broke around the house, or change light bulbs, or repair leaks. There was much to lament. Not even when my siblings and I were arguing violently and she begged him to intervene, did he deign to open the door to see what was going on outside. As far as he was concerned, we could burst our mother's eardrums mercilessly, do whatever we pleased, as long as he wasn't called upon to interrupt his intellectual activities and leave his office. We had two Helenos, the husband-father who spent all hours of the day living inside himself, and the notable actor Heleno Negromonte, kind, eloquent, fun, for whom all the world was a stage with its limelights. By merely walking out the door, the husband-father would transform into actor. From the neighbor lady who would take the elevator with him to the doorman who would bid him good morning, no one could escape his outpouring of niceties and flatteries, of cliches accompanied by the most exaggerated gestures. With his poetry lines and his mannerisms, he would seduce young and old, men, women, and children. And as if he were in front of the camera in the spotlight, he would open his arms wide and recite the verses of Augusto dos Anjos. I, son of carbon and ammonia, monster of darkness and brightness. And fixing his big, thick-lashed eyes on the listener, slowly stroking his well-trimmed beard and combing the black and gray hairs with his fingers, he would proceed to recite the verses of Fernando Pessoa, one of his favorite poets. I am nothing. I will never be but nothing. I cannot desire to be but nothing. Aside from this, I have in myself all the dreams in the world. For each situation, a persona, a line, a poem, a smile. My mother was not annoyed by this constant showing off. I believe she even enjoyed it. I didn't understand how my mother, a good-looking, kind, honest, articulate woman, could allow herself to be eclipsed by him that way. When they were together, no one would direct a word to her, as if she didn't exist as an individual, as if she were an appendage of his. That infuriated me, and even more so that such invisibility did not bother her. My grandmother, Sarita, would tell me about events in her son's adolescence and childhood in an attempt to convince me that he was what he had always been, what nature determined he would be, just as he had his blue eyes, fair skin, and brown hair. Then was it in my father's genes to believe the world only existed because he existed? Grandma would purse her lips in disapproval and tell me there were many girls out there who wished their father were Heleno Negromonte, a learned, witty, charismatic man, highly respected in his profession. It was a mystery to me how my father could charm people with his pantomimes when they didn't come from within, when people irritated him, when deep inside he didn't grant anyone his genuine attention. I admit he cared for his family, but only occasionally and not spontaneously, because my mother had to point out to him his role as husband and father, remind him that she hadn't married a phantom, nor had she conceived her children on her own. Every now and then, my mother would get him to hear her, but most of the time he was oblivious to what went on beyond his office door. I remember in particular the day Heitor made the book I was reading disappear. I had left it open on my bed and gone to the bathroom. Back in my room, I couldn't find it. My mother, who usually settled such disputes, had left for work. After scouring every room to no avail, I thought I would turn to my father. The trouble was, I had been reading one of the Vagalume books and feared that because he was prejudiced against authors he didn't know, he would ask me what kind of junk I was spending my precious time on, and I wouldn't be able to speak to the wonders in the collection. And yet, because my mother wasn't going to be home anytime soon, I decided to go to my father. I knocked once, twice, three times, and was about to give up when he opened the door, visibly cross. I dissolved into tears and I begged him to go do something about that primitive brother of mine and make him return my book. He shook his head, looked at me in that way that always made me feel like the smallest of all creatures, and told me we were an intolerable hindrance, and sometimes it was only too easy to understand Herod. He let out a curse word and slammed the door on me. I didn't know what hindrance meant, but I soon intuited it couldn't be anything good. Although I was only 10 or 11, I sensed at that very moment how difficult it was for my father, the only one I had, to exercise his fatherhood. Neither the curse word nor the mention of Herod bothered me. What disturbed me was the vehemence and the truth with which his words reached me, knocked me down, and nailed me to the ground. I wished to kill and bury that feeling, bury it deeply, but the angry hoofs of something expanding inside me kicked it about, as if my father's difficulty turned into hurt in me, were a ferocious predator, and the feeling came to blows with something growing inside me, a tussle of sharp talons and fangs, and I couldn't gather the strength to break them up.